so they decided to walk all over them and answer them as part of their talks. But now you guys have questions that they're not prepared for, so why don't you step up to the mics and try to stump them. Mic 2?
7?
7, yeah.
All right. Fred
Totally dark out there, I can't see it.
Fred Nyax from SFO Tower. A couple questions. First, is there anything going to be done to deal with National Article 48 reps, people on ATSAP teams, people that are out of your facility but still counted towards your number? And number 2, is there any difference for the nest for somebody who withdraws versus somebody who fails training?
So I'll answer the nest question first. So there actually were some changes made recently, and they were incorporated into the collective bargaining agreement as well. For instance, a developmental who withdraws from training, they will only be offered up to the 5 facilities, unlike the other CPCITs and CPCITs who are unsuccessful. They'll be given a much broader list of facilities based on nest determinations. So that's primarily the biggest difference. The other thing, functionally, when they do go for placement, CPCITs who are unsuccessful are given the first tier of selections, and then it's developmentals who are unsuccessful get the next list, and then developmentals who withdraw get the third list as they process the paperwork. As far as the Article 48 and other individuals who are out on a full-time basis, that was something that when the Collaborative Resource Group met to establish the CPC targets, they factored in a buffer to try and account for those in the calculations. They're not going to be taken out on a facility-by-facility basis, but the calculations that were used based on the facility algorithms that we used at the time that was built in, and will be built in once we move to that new modeling. If we ever can get to that, there will be a component that will account for collaborative initiatives in the general sense.
Mike 8?
Well, just before we move on to Mike 8, just to further that, in column K, so if you take a look at it, what you'll see is we don't address right now the Article 48 folks, but what you do see and what became known to us was there, particularly, and I forget which facility it was, it might have been Kansas City Center, had 17 people on temporary assignments. So when you look at column K from where we first started the tool to where it is now, we subtract out those on temporary, where there's paperwork. It's officially temporarily assigned to a different position outside of the air traffic control bargaining unit, and they're subtracted out from the total. And it listed that it's identified in K, so if your facility has 200 CPCs with 20 on a temp assignment, it would show 180, and everything else is based off of that.
Mike 8?
Troy Harrison, Seattle Center. I was wondering if you guys had considered looking at centers, especially red centers, breaking it down into areas of staffing. For instance, our facility, we're a red facility. We have somebody that's in TMU, they're fully staffed, they want to swap back to the floor, and they want to go to an area or another area that's short, but the area that wants to go to TMU is overstaffed. It's the only overstaffed area we have. But since we're a red facility, we can't do that.
This topic came up when we were negotiating the national release policy about allowing the area specific to do it. And we were fairly adamantly opposed to it because we did not want to move into a position where we were starting to take one roof facility and starting to say, okay, we will treat that one facility differently based on the needs of an individual area. It was our view, and because we had talked to the agency about it for a long time, like I said, it was a long, arduous process to get there, that if there's a facility, and traffic management's a little bit different, we can come back to that and treat that differently. But if you're in a facility that has multiple areas where one area is 90% and the other area is 60, you should probably be looking at trying to even that out somehow by Article 46 or some other method. And that was a big issue for the agency. They were concerned, what if in my facility, they come in and they take the one out of somebody, because my facility overall meets the national release criteria, but I have one really short-staffed facility and the rest are really healthy or really healthy. What if they come for that one? I said, well, you need to start planning for that. You need to plan ahead and try to even out the workload and even out the staffing and the distribution of what you have, so that if your facility shows that it's Cat 1 or Cat 2, things should be somewhat level as best you can so they can get out. So the answer to your question is we considered it, and we decided that it would be better to stick with a one facility, one category, one release.
Okay, thanks.
Mike 1?
Kyle Hall, Shreveport Tower, Gravcon. I got 2 questions. One, it's my understanding that if multiple people from one facility put in for the same place, it's based on the date their ERRs go in. Is that correct?
Well, managers have the chance to rank the individuals if there's multiple candidates. And 2, I would say, I'm not saying it's practice, but last go around, the Eastern Service Area didn't have a chance to do any, we didn't receive any rankings. What we did as a group is we looked at the first things on experience, right? And then based on that, I guess you could say if we went down the list, we kind of looked at a tiebreaker and said who put in first. So that did occur in the last round, but it's not a set rule.
Okay, my other question is my wife's also a controller, and the way our numbers are, one CPC puts us from red to category 1. Is there any consideration given, like our situation, both of us would obviously like to go at the same time, but if one of us gets picked up, we're back to red and have to wait on the next CPC.
You know, when I mentioned before about some unintended consequences, you know, one of the things that drove this forward was, and I use Binghamton as the example, Binghamton was so short-staffed that even though the agency imposed upon themselves 2-year release dates, because that's all they did, they wrote an email to themselves and said, let's not have anything longer than a 2-year release date. But I think they have convinced themselves that it's a law or someplace. But they have 2-year release dates. So the manager there was looking for an exception to that to go to 3 or 4-year release dates because they felt that they were so short-staffed. While simultaneously, the facility was so overstaffed that they couldn't get anyone. So we would sit across from finance and say, can you send someone, because finance at that point was in charge of that, can you send someone to Binghamton? No. Their forecast is over 100%, they can't get anybody. Then I'd look at the person from the ATO and say, can you release anybody from that facility? And they'd say, no, they're way understaffed. At exactly the same moment. So now we fast forward to here, and we use that as a reason why we needed to change the process. So we fast forward to here, and one of the unintended consequences that we had not seen is the facilities that have, you know, less than 15, 10, 11, 12, 13 people, where everyone is essentially 10%, you have exactly what you have. You're 91%, and we Cat 1. Can't release anybody, because as soon as I let somebody go, we're below the national average, so we're stuck. So that's one of the things that we recognize, and we're going to go back and we're going to address it and staff up to 100% in those smaller facilities, and we have to contemplate some way to get more than one person out at a time without them dropping down. So that long answer tells you right now there is nothing for it, but we're looking at it not for husband and wives, but we're looking at it because it just doesn't make sense to put ourselves into a position where we're simultaneously saying no one can go there because you're above the national average, and no one can be released because you'll go below the national average. That's a problem.
Thank you.
Mike 2?
Bailey Jackson, NorCal Tricon. If you could just speak maybe briefly on the difference between the ERR lists and how they get pulled, when they get pulled, versus why and how bids are put out, and the difference between those two.
Who wants that?
Well, I guess I can start with it. So there are no more ERR lists per se. Everything is processed through the NSEP. So any ERRs that are in the system, they will be evaluated for possible selections at these quarterly meetings. The bids are being utilized now as a secondary tool to try and make movement in the system. Other than the 2 open continuous bids for 2 of our most desperately staffed facilities, the agency isn't releasing bids at the moment for controller positions. Now, if there are not enough candidates in an ERR pool based on probably 2 or 3 panels, they will be targeting bids. That's what's being considered. One hasn't been released yet, but they're considering targeting bids for Cat 1 and Cat 2 facilities to try and encourage people to move into those facilities. But right now, the primary mechanism is to try and get people to be moving through the ERR process.
And for us, and we've had these conversations, you know, the ERR process, we're completely part of it. It's transparent. We're there. We see the list. We know what's happening. We're part of that process. The MPP portion, you know, is back to the problems that we've had in the past where the managers meet in secret. They make their secret deals or whatever happens. You know, we have, you know, a controller trying to get from Miami Center to Chicago Tracon. Chicago Tracon desperately needs people. And because he submitted his name via the MPP process, it took months. It took a long time for that employee to get selected. If the ERR process was in place for that person, we know we're going to have a quarterly review, and you can either be released or not be released. So we, as a union, are trying to keep it, you know, where if there is significant enough people who want to transfer to a facility under the ERR process, there's no reason to put out a bid. You know, I was at a local facility recently that I won't name, but it's right around here, and I was there, and we looked at, you know, how many people want to go, and, you know, 65 people want to go there. 65 people. So if we put out an MPP, I don't know, is it better when there's 68 people? Like, at what point do you have enough people who want to go that we can keep it in the ER process and say, okay, the union's part of this, we can make sure it's done fairly and equitably and it's transparent.
Just, I think you said you were going to talk on the TM issue before that, but in regards to the bid versus the ERR, TM to controller that way, or vice versa, controller to TM, are those being addressed through the ERR process, or is that strictly bids?
No, you can ERR from traffic management to ATC and ATC to traffic management, and the process for ERRs and the NCEP is for everything. It's for both ways. Where it gets a little tricky is the national release policy, because the command center is outside of it because we don't have collaboratively agreed upon numbers with the command center. To leave the command center, we don't have any process because we don't have numbers for them. But going out of an air traffic facility into the command center, you have to go through the release policy.
Mike 6.
Jay McCall, the Camarillo Tower. Dean, I dropped my pen when you were explaining the categories. Could you please clarify the difference between the Cat 1, 2, and the red facilities? I know you said it was K and W, but I missed the other part.
Yep, it's on the priority placement tool, the two columns for purposes of the national release policy for your interests are column K and column W. Actual on board to authorized and forecast to authorized. And the national average for each one of those columns is right up in the top in bold number. And if your facility is in both K and W, 90% or better, you're a Category 1 facility, and you could be released 0 to 3 months or up to 6 months at the election of the employee. And if you're above the national average, which again is right at the top of the column, but below 90%, you're considered a Category 2 facility, and you can be released in 0 to 12 months. And if you go onto the NACA website, you can download that MOU and not have to write this stuff down.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mike 10.
Jeff Gildy, Louisville, Stanford. I got a question, Dean, on the deviations. We're a red facility, 74%. The manager requested a deviation for a staff specialist. He had already been a temporary staff specialist for 2 years. Requested a deviation without collaboration with me. Could you describe how that process is supposed to work? And if anybody on the NCEP team would actually call and verify with the fact rep that it was actually negotiated or it was collaborated about, because I never would have agreed to it where it's 74%.
Right, so I think that's a good question. So the second part of it is there's no requirement for them to collaborate with us on making the request to deviate. The NCEP is not involved in the deviation process. The NCEP is involved in ERR transfers, not the deviation process. So the deviation process is solely an agency, provision. And the only connection that the union has to it is before the approval is given to the facility and or to the employee, they have to make notification known to the office of the president. And like I said, it goes from the deputy COO for a red facility in an email to Trish, who takes it and sends it out. So that's the process. But what they do and what we have seen, now, again, may not be 100% of the time, but what they do is they send and they'll say, okay, so the CPC numbers right now are 85%. My supervisory number is at 40%. And if I take the one CPC out as a deviation, we'll go down to 75%, and my FLM number will go up to 72%. They try, as best, we see, they try to not overly beat up the CPC number to simply bring up the FLM. And where it becomes even more obvious is in the smaller facilities that are authorized 2 FLMs. They're either at 0, 50, or 100. That's it. 0, 50, or 100 when they're authorized 2. So that's where we see a lot of them, and unfortunately we do see them in the bigger facilities, but that's the process, is they tell us this is what we're doing, and they provide their logic why they think this is okay, why they were able to, how they justified making that move. And it is not collaborative, it's just theirs.
Does NACA have any kind of say-so in this deviation?
No.
At all?
The only thing that they're required to do is to notify the union prior to notifying the facility and the employee of the decision. It's not a collaborative decision, it's not a negotiated decision, it's a notification. So we could look at it and say, wow, that was horrendous. Why would you do that? Right? We could do that, but the decision is theirs.
All right.
Mike 4?
Ty Howard from Moses Lake, Washington. Kind of a two-part question. The first part, how long is an ERR request good for? Is there a limit on it, or could you technically have a request for a facility for, say,
No,
10 years?
Under the contract, the ERR is on file for 15 months unless it's updated by the employee.
Okay. Next question, or follow-up to that. I'm at a red facility, low level. Most of the 5 CPCs that we have want to leave eventually. We do have good news on the horizon. We've got a couple that look like they're going to be ready probably by this time next year, and we would be up into that possible Cat 2 category. If everybody submits an ERR who wants to go, what's to stop from, say I have a target of facility X I want to go to, and I put my paperwork in there, but everybody else just starts putting in for this facility, that facility, because they just want to get out. We would all have the same rating, I guess you could say, unless you want to say seniority rates you a touch higher. How is that going to play out for, I guess, who would be first to go in that case?
You want me to take it?
Oh, I can do it. No. It is based on whoever puts in for the highest ranked facility on the list during that NSEP round. That person would probably get selected first. Now, if you both put in, you go back to the management ranking issue, and if there wasn't a management ranking, the NSEP team would actually dive in a little bit more on if there was a tie.
Okay.
And just the management ranking piece is, if there's a facility that has 20 vacancies and 5 names who can be released, there's no ranking, because they have more of a need than they're getting. It's the ranking comes in when there's 5 vacancies and there's 20 names. Now that goes to the manager, and they'll rank them and say, my number 1 choice all the way down through the 20th, but it doesn't mean they get that. Because by the time we go back to number 1, someone else from the facility may have been selected to a higher ranked, a higher needed facility, and now you can't be released. Number 1 can't be released. So the ranking isn't an order of selection, it's a wish list, if you will. And it only happens when there's more names than vacancies.
So if I wanted to go to a facility that was probably a Cat 1, and other people looked at the, I guess the facilities that in the most need, they would be smarter to just start submitting paperwork, just trying to get out of our facility at like the highest need facilities period, and people that they have a place in mind that they want to go. I don't particularly want to move my family around a bunch of times to get to the point where I can get to where I want to go. I'm happy where I'm at, and I would like to eventually move on to a particular facility, but are people behind me going to constantly be just basically bumping me out left and right because they are willing to go to the facilities more in need? and then we're going to get pushed back down to the red category again.
Listen, I think we recognize collectively we're really good at finding holes in gaming the system. So I don't know if that's going to happen, but I do know that if people in your facility pick a short-staffed facility, they pick, a D10 or a C90 or something and say, I want to go there, and they get selected, they're not going to get selected to go anyplace else. Okay. So they can take the chance and go and certify there and then try to move on. But what doesn't happen anymore is you can't say, oh yes, I'll go to C90, get a release date, and then say, okay, now I can use that date to go someplace else. That doesn't work like that anymore. So yes, people below you can say, I'll go to that shortest staff facility, but they really have to go.
Okay, thank you.
Mike 3.
Jennifer Lindsay, SoCal Tracon. My question is, if a facility moves from red to category 2 and subsequently makes internal selections prior to an NCEP meeting, are they allowed to reduce the staffing number to the point that no controller movements can take place? And who is regulating that?
Facility is, say that again, what, it's?
So in between NCEP meetings, if your facility goes from being red, frozen, to a category 2, and then selects internally, who is controlling if they're allowed to select to the point where they might even be lower than they were before they made those internal selections?
So I'm assuming if it's in between NCEPs, it's not ERRs, they're MPPs, and if it's internal, they must be making supervisors out of people, right? Is that that's what we're talking about?
Supervisors and staff support specialists.
So there's nothing to stop that. That can happen. In between the in between the NCEP, a facility that meets the national release criteria, if they are put out an MPP and they can, and they select somebody, and the facility meets that criteria to release them, they can do that. They can release them.
So then the facility would continue to be red at every NCEP if they were filling their own needs in-house first?
Yes, but I'm assuming at some point they would actually get to 100% if they kept on doing it to block it. But yeah, theoretically they could do that.
Okay. I have 2 more questions. I'll be quick. So the staffing numbers that they use the morning of the NCEP meeting, are they current or are they from the one from the month prior that came out? Like, for example, one came out on August 22nd. Will they be using those numbers? Or will
That's correct, yes.
They will? Okay. And who is checking the accuracy of the staffing workbook?
We're hoping that the FAC rep is actually taking a look at that every single month too, to make sure that you have it's actually reflected in the priority placement tool. So we do have ways to look at it, but we need your assistance at the local levels to make sure that data is correct as well.
Absolutely. That's why we're trying to make it as widely disseminated as possible, so the reps and even employees at large, who can go to their rep and say, it says we have 10 CPCs, don't we have 11? And we've tracked down errors, and vice versa, where they have people who are CPCITs who are counted as CPCs, and we've been able to get the agency to go back in, and it has to be done at the facility level to fix the erroneous information.
Thank you.
Mike 7.
Hi, Mark Crabtree, Anchorage Center. I got 2 questions regarding the deviation. You did clear up that the deviation request is purely an agency handled situation. So when the union does find out that there was an egregious change or move made, what recourse does the union have to fight that?
When we become aware of it, and we're aware of one now that is not a technical violation, but certainly seems outside of the spirit and intent of what we're trying to accomplish here, we go and we call the question. We say, explain this to us. What is the logic behind this decision? And the one that I'm kind of vaguely referring to did not go up and did not require a deviation. It was just done locally because locally they had the authority to do it. So we could take that type of a thing, raise it nationally or to a couple levels up and say, this to the union does not seem like a good corporate or organizational decision. Can you go look at that and tell us why that was approved and how can we stop it from happening? If we get something that has been approved by the Office of the COO or the Office of the Vice President of Air Traffic Services, the reason we put that in there is so we can see it, and if it is egregious, we can say to them, explain this to us, which is part of why they provide a very brief explanation as to why they did it when they send over. And like I said, there's a lot of denied and a few approved, But if you're in a facility where there's a deviation request that has been made that you believe is egregious and it has been approved, you should get it to your RVP with the facts and the figures, and we can get it up and we can take a look at it, and if it's that egregious, we can address it.
Okay, then to speak to that, to the second part of that question, being that the union does not have any play in the deviation request, what is to keep the ATM from writing, a request to move a bargaining unit employee to a supervisor position and make it look as if that's what they need and that's what the numbers need, even though, on that deviation request aspect, NCEP's no longer a part of it. So who's going back to look and see that the supervisors, even at the level they're at, are not working 6-day work weeks, are getting all their leave? Meanwhile, when that employee gets moved into a supervisory role, that's going to cause more overtime. It's going to cause people to not get a leave and things along those lines.
With the attached to the ERSOP is the supervisory authorized number for each facility. So, I don't know, how many supervisors are you authorized?
20, I believe.
20? So, at some point when they get to, 18, 19, 20, and the CPC number is low, and they keep making a deviation request to keep taking out to stay 100%, that is outside the meaning and the intent of what we signed up for. What we have seen is where the CPC on board now is 80 some odd percent and their FLM is 60. They take one out, it drops to high 70s and they move up to 60s or something like that. Not in every case, but if you're in a facility where they're staffing their FLM ranks at 100% of the time and constantly taking out and moving over, we should get that information up because we have not seen that happening on a regular basis.
Right, and that's not necessarily the case at this point. They're probably at 3/4. They stand to lose 3 or 4 more due to retirement or things along those lines by the end of this year or early next year, and are wanting to, we're at whatever 67% staffing, and just to lose one controller puts us down to 64, just so that they would still have enough soups to proficiently run the area, even though they wouldn't be at whatever their staffing
Right.
number might be as a
Listen, if it was up to us, that we would have locked everything down, and no one could go anywhere unless they went through a joint review process. But like everything else, to reach the agreement that we reached, they were very adamant that they needed a way to keep the NAS functioning, and they needed to have a way to get to the supervisors. So while that they can still do that, and it may not be perfect, it is significantly better than anything we've had before, because that's the one piece that they still have. Everything else we're part and parcel to, and we can see, and it's transparent. So, but if your facility is falling into some weird cycle where they're constantly pulling out of the controller workforce to staff the FLM ranks, that is certainly something that, whoever your RVP is can look at that with the DO and say, why does that keep happening?
And then finally, is there any worry on the union's part that being that they don't have any say in the deviation process, that the agency is not going to fall into some sort of trend to say, well, we've denied this, this, and this, and they've denied so many controller ERR requests from one place to another or whatever, but then say, well, we've denied 10 of these, so now we're going to approve one of these and make an employee a supervisor.
I'm not sure what you mean. Are we worried about
Yeah,
them?
who's keeping tab? Is the agency going to say, well, we've denied 20 requests in a row through deviations, and then a deviation comes through that's going to benefit the agency, and then they're going to say, well, look, we've denied 20 of these deviations so far, now we're going to approve a deviation.
That could happen.
I've heard rumors that is happening currently, so I don't know.
No, I've not heard it. It could happen.
Mike 8.
Hello, Matt Kanzig, Livermore Tower. We're one of those small facilities that is Category 1 exempt. Does the Category 1 exempt status exclude us from participating in mutual swaps?
Yeah,
That's a good question.
Unfortunately, I think it does fall into that little gray area, because you wouldn't be able to release somebody. It would take you below the national average. So it's, as has been mentioned a couple of times, mutual swaps is one of the highest It's certainly the most discussed issue, that and traffic management, and we're trying to get the agency into a position that makes it, logical and sensical to allow things to happen. And unfortunately, that's one of the ones that are somewhat confounding them at the moment.
Thank you.
And Mike 7?
Yeah, Fred Nauyuk, SFO Tower. So our facility target number has changed from 32 to 31 to 30, even though we have a 10-year record showing increased traffic. Our management wants to increase staffing per shift, legitimately so, because the pushes are getting later, the pushes are getting heavier, we need to split ground more often. How do we get that facility staffing number changed back to where it should be?
So I guess I'll try and tackle that. First of all, the target number, the CRWG number, shouldn't have changed. San Francisco is not one of the ones that's been adjusted, unless they're doing something shady. Now, what you may be referring to is the finance staffing standard number that was in play before we set the Collaborative Resource Work Group number. And that did change wildly over time based on the modeling system that finance uses. So for now, the CRWG number is fixed, and hopefully all the calculations should be based on that. That being said, the process that we have agreed to with the agency to getting those reviewed begins at the facility level. If you and your manager believe that your facility number needs to be adjusted, you need to be able to articulate that clearly and provide some justification as to why you believe the number needs to change. And then you would take that and elevate it up through their channels, through the TDM, through the ARVP and the RVP. And if those, if it is agreed upon all the way that this is a legitimate request, it'll get forwarded to the CRWG for review. And then the CRWG has evaluated a few facilities and has adjusted a couple. There is starting to get a log jam, and the reason is the agency believes, and we wholly do not subscribe to this, that the total number of CPCs in the system has to be a zero-sum game. So right now, when you add up all the targets across the system, it comes to 12,896 CPCs. So if San Francisco is to gain 2, that means Miami Center has to lose 2 to keep it zero-sum. Now, we don't believe that, but that's the approach that they've taken up to this point. So we have to work, we're working through them, and now we're back involving finance, and things get wrapped around the axle. That being said, we do have facilities requesting reductions, and we have facilities requesting, incremental increases to their staffing. We have been able to work out a couple without subscribing to the zero-sum game. However, on a parallel track, and Dean, I think, cited it when he read the original CRWG workgroup MOU, there is an attempt to do scientific modeling and get the tools that finance utilizes to generate a number to a point where we can buy into the inputs, buy into the calculations, and we can actually have a real-life, scientifically based model that will generate an appropriate number of staffing for a facility that would be, it would adjust based on, circumstances changing, a new, hub is developed, or another flight school shows up, or traffic changes because of a specific pattern. We're getting a lot closer on resolving that modeling dilemma, in which case the CRWG numbers would be set aside and we'd move forward with a different system, but we're not quite there yet.
Mike 1?
Steven Spiller, Houston Tower. Thank you guys so much for the transparent process, and just in that clarity, looking at the facility rankings sheet that lists every facility as the NCEP goes to do the draft, it appears to me that there's a lot of facilities in the top 50 that are thus zero eligible to select, and I'm just curious how that ranking process is working, and why are there facilities that, according to the NCEP numbers, cannot absorb a body, and yet they're prioritized enough to say that they need the bodies?
You want me to cover that one too? Okay, so the system, and Roby sort of mentioned of it, that is used to create that draft list is called Decision Lens. And it's a software system that has an algorithm that utilizes criteria that are established by humans and assigns them weight. So when we sat down in the CRWG to develop, in the development of the NCEP, the players in the room, which involved finance, involved management services, ATO representatives, NACA reps, we looked at different criteria for each facility, what we believe to be criteria for facilities that were important. Primarily, it's facility health, but that's not the only thing that is applied to the software. Whether or not it serves a Core 30 airport, whether it's a center, whether it's a large TRACON, whether it's a hard-to-staff facility. And all these various components were then rated against each other. Which one has more weight? Do you say that a large TRACON is more significant than a center? And if so, by how much? Is a level 7 tower more significant than a center? And if so, by how much? And it then uses sort of some collective thinking calculations, and based on every individual's balance of those criteria, it sums them up and creates the overall output. And that's what does it. That's why you can get a tower. The first time we ran it, I think locally, Gillespie Tower was very highly ranked, and we kind of said, well, I wonder what prompted that. And what had happened is we had inadvertently moved one of the criteria significantly further than I think we had intended, and it generated an output that was questionable. So that's why that happens. The primary driver is facility health, projected and current. But as of right now, there are other factors that play in. That's how you start to see other facilities move into the top 50.
Mike 9.
Brett Steinley, Pittsburgh Tower. Has there been any consideration to allow employees to be able to verify that their ERRs were put on request in the rare event that a service area may misplace or not forward their ERRs onto the committee?
If somebody has a question, that contact their RVP or have their FAC rep contact their RVP, we can answer the question. We get periodic updates of all the ERRs that are in the system. We can quickly identify whether or not the person has one on file.
Yeah, the consideration, maybe you put 4 different ERRs into 3 different service areas. It'd be nice if there was a way to just go on and verify that your ERR was received. I mean, you get your timestamp receipt from the service area that they received the mailed version, but there's no way to verify that that version was then forwarded. Right. Other than, we can email and harass you guys.
So it's a legitimate question because we're dealing with people today who are trying to ER to someplace and their name is not on the list and it got hung up on HR's desk. There's in the interest of transparency, it would make sense. There are some concerns on about putting it out and having everyone see where everyone wants to go. Right now, there's no way to just show that Tom Adcock submitted an ERR request and only he can see it. We can see everyone, and there's concern that once we make that public, everyone in your facility knows you're trying to get out and you didn't want them to know it. But we know it's a problem, and Andrew touched on it earlier. When we came into this, the servicing HRs, that's where by contract you submit your ERR request. And when we first got into this, 9 regions were operating like 9, not even independent countries, companies, but like 9 countries that were at war with each other that spoke different languages. Correct. It was so grossly and overwhelmingly incompetent and inept that when we looked at it as an example, Philadelphia, when you looked at the Eastern region service area, Philadelphia was listed, and not alone. Why would the FAA use the internationally recognized symbol for Philly, PHL, when they can simply start making shit up? Sorry. They can make things up. I know, I'm sorry. They can make things up. They would go PHILLY, Philadelphia, KPHL, so there was not even a way to sort that out. When we looked at it, we saw that there was people who were in Portland, a lot of them, trying to go to Atlanta. I couldn't figure out why was so many from Portland trying to get to Atlanta. Well, they had the identifier mixed up because it was actually Peachtree trying to get to Atlanta, not Portland, but they had it listed as Peachtree. So all of those kind of weird things happen, and they do make mistakes, and HR is the weak link in the whole process, which is why we're trying to get to an automated system. And if it goes automated, I think you'd have a much higher confidence rate that it was accepted and it actually made it on there. But we are aware of that, and right now the best we can do is say, contact your RVP, who can contact any one of us, and we can look into it and see if you're on there.
Right, because I know even, in the past, FAC reps and managers would get hand-delivered copies of ERs. They would know. If a list came to the facility and they didn't see a name on it that they knew was on file, you could backtrack. Right now, a facility has no way of verifying, even if, they know Controller A has an ERR on file, they can't even know whether that person was considered. They could go through the placement tool, see that they know they're at a high or a Cat 1 facility, they should be able to get released. There's just no way to verify that, to any oversights.
Point of order, Mike 5. It's like almost 5:30. I call for the orders of the day.
I got something to say.
We're going to continue answering questions.
Thank you.
Mike 6.
Shane Shannon from Napa Tower. Our current staffing levels are 4 CPCs, and we have a developmental that might be transferring to another facility under special circumstances made up by district management. Is there any rules or regulations that would prevent that from happening since our staffing levels are so low?
Why are they transferring? Like, you have an employee who's being transferred?
Most likely will be.
I mean, this seems like I'm getting 10% of a story. Like, there's a lot more going on in this. So maybe we could talk about that, not in front of everybody, because I don't know what else is going on there.
Mike 10.
Mike Halberg, Louisville, Stanford. My question's for Dean. You talked about amending the MOU. Was there any talk about adding a step max in there like they have with the hardship? You can only go 3 steps up to prevent people from jumping the mid-levels to 6 to 12?
No. But we haven't considered it. I don't know. I mean, the contract does not contain any limits on higher or lower. The MOU just contains essentially the release policy of it, which is not intended to alter that portion of it. But we have not considered putting any kind of restriction on going up or down, how high you can go.
Okay.
Mike 1.
Aubrey Farrar, Santa Monica Tower. How you guys doing today?
Good. It's hot sitting here.
I understand, I understand. Certified level 10 controller, CPCIT. Wanted to progress in my career, moved to a level 12. Terminated my training, correction. My training was terminated, no TRB, sent to the nest. The level of facilities, I believe that you guys sent me on this list. I got level 5s, I got level 6s, I got level 7s, and one level 8 coming from a level 10 to a 12. Now I'm at Santa Monica Tower. It's a great tower. I love it. Good people. However, my question is, with NACA and the FAA having this collaborative effort, and we have a panel of people that compile this list, which I don't think there are people that put this list together. From what I'm understanding, there is some type of algorithm, if I'm not mistaken. The algorithm that I received on my list, from what I understand, doesn't make sense. Certified at a level 10 tower going to a 12. God forbid things didn't work out for me there. But the example in the gray area that I'm trying to understand is that if somebody potentially wanted to move up and progress in their career from a level 5 to a 7 to an 8 to a 10 to a 12 to get knocked back down to a 5, doesn't make sense. To lose $70,000 from the East Coast to be transported to the West Coast doesn't make sense. On top of that, and this is my last thing, I guess maybe the question that I really want to ask is, it's not about me. How can we protect our union members from this potentially happening to them in the future? And that's all I got.
So you were a certified ATC 10?
Affirmative. Certified 10, went to a 12. Didn't get a TRB. I'm not mad at the union for that. But let's talk about it if you want to. I was in my training.
Well, let me just ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
So you were a CPC at an...
CPC at National Tower,
Let me
3.5 years.
You got to let me ask you the question.
Sure.
You were a CPC at a level 10 facility.
Yes, sir.
You transferred to a 12.
Yes, sir.
You were unsuccessful. You went through the nest.
Yes, sir.
The nest came back and offered you a list of facilities, and none of them were a 10.
None were a 10, none were a 9. I had 1 8, 2 7s, 4 6s, and 2 5s. Everything on the West Coast. Doesn't make sense.
No 10s.
No 10s.
So the only reason or the only way you could get to that point is if at that time
yes,
there was not a single vacancy at an ATC 10 facility. And what about the facility you left? You were not even offered...
The facility, okay, so we talk about the numbers when it comes to an 83 percentile or better to get out of the facility. I waited, I worked, I ERR'd out of my facility. Now my staffing levels at my facility are greater than 100%. So...
so there was no vacancy to go back to?
So yes, that's pretty much what it is. So the return rights for a facility that you work hard to get out of are none because the staffing levels at the facility that you just left are greater than 83%. So with the nest, from a CPCIT list that I understand that you believe, this guy in the pink shirt, I forget your name, you said that the CPCITs, they get the first list, developmental's number 2, if I believe I'm correct, if that's what you said. I don't think I got 1, 2, or 3. So I'm here. And I just want to understand what algorithm or what type of, I'm not going to curse, BS. No, I'm getting passionate. Because I love my job. I really do. I do not understand this. Can someone please on this panel tell me what's that about?
We can't sit here and tell you, because this is the first I'm hearing about it, and I don't think anybody else up here has heard about it. We could certainly look into what happened, but I can tell you by contract, few things. If you're a CPC, you go to another facility and you're in IT and you're unsuccessful, you're supposed to have a training review board.
Okay.
If you are, let me finish.
I understand.
Right? If you are unsuccessful in training, you go through the nest, and if there is a vacancy, you should be offered no less than the level at which you left. So if you were an ATC 10, then you would qualify for an ATC 10, that level facility, and any other facility in the country with the vacancies that is 10 and below. Now, what we can account for is at that moment in time, from what you're saying, there was not a ATC 10 vacancy anywhere in the country, or a 9, or whatever else happened. I mean, we can certainly look into that. I don't know when it happened. I do know that if you are unsuccessful in training, and you're a CPC and you transfer out, that you can go back to your facility as long as it's, below 100%. It's not up to the national average. But I certainly can talk to you afterwards and find out more. But to sit here and say, give me an answer now, first we heard about it. I don't know the answer to your question.
And that's very rare that you guys are the first to hear about it, because I believe the job of the NACA is to push this, the RVPs are supposed to push this information to you guys to make better decisions on, it's a lack of communication somewhere. So this is why I'm here. And let me say one more thing. To get the list to come to the West Coast, I got a list. You said Gillespie. Didn't you say Gillespie was some weird algorithm that populated? That was one of the facilities that I was offered. And and I'm saying, I don't know no one that works there. God bless you. But with me, if I didn't pick any one of those facilities off that list, I was going to be terminated from the FAA. So maybe you can get just a 1/10 of my passion here to tell me I went from a 10 to a 12 to a 6, it's getting downgraded to a 5 in February, losing $70,000 and expect me to pay some dues. Now, I love NACA. I am all hardcore for the union. I do. But I do want this situation to be on display so this doesn't happen to any one of my brothers or sisters. And that's it.
Mike 1.
Thank you. Andrew, you spoke briefly about the TM bids. I just want to know, Will Banks, NCT. Andrew, you spoke briefly about the TM bids. I just want to see if you could briefly expand on that. And also I wanted to know your opinion about bids in particular, whether that be the command center, TM, staff specialist, whatever. If you think that this policy for facilities that are in the red promotes the FAA not selecting the most qualified or capable person for the bid and just selecting who's the easiest accessible, whether that be category 1 or category 2, as if they just skip over the number 1 person and go to 4 because they're at a category 1 facility.
So when they do a bid, I'll try and answer this the last part first. HR will gather all the applicants, and they will refer the qualified and the well-qualified list. So HR is not going to parse that based on what type of category the facility has. Now, if they do a category 1 or 2 specific facility, they're going to say everybody's qualified to come from there, and then you're just picking from whoever's available. Will it stop games? No, that's kind of what Dean was alluding to earlier. That's one of the reasons we're trying to promote the ERR process, where there's a little bit tighter controls and a little bit more scrutiny that we're able to apply to it. With the MPPs that are out there, it becomes wild, wild west again, and there's all sorts of opportunities for gamesmanship. For the TM bids, it's really the same thing. I mean, we're just trying to, they are applied, I think, in the context of the ERR policy. There are some issues with people being promoted out of the traffic management unit into supervisory positions that we're still trying to reconcile. It's much like the mutual swaps. That was why I was bringing up. Those are issues that we're trying to get the agency to move in a much more a smarter way. So hopefully that answers it.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see anyone else in mic, so I'll turn it back over to a chair. Or somebody to chair the meeting, because I can't. Oh, mic 1.
Christian Cambry, Palo Alto Tower. For FLMs that are ERRing out to be controllers, are they exempt from the release policy?
Yeah, the national release policy applies only to bargaining unit employees in air traffic facilities.
So if I get a deviation to become a supervisor, do my year probation, and then ERR out, I could skip around the entire release policy twice?
If that's what you chose to do, yes, you could do that.
You'll lose my seniority, but that's what's happening in my facility.
Yeah.
And that's cool?
It's up to you. Is it cool for you? I'm not doing it.
Okay.